Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Annabelle Escamilla. For those of you who have been getting emails from me, my maiden name was Huddle, so if you are a little confused, it is still me. Thank you once again for taking the time to come out and join us today for a presentation with Miss Jules. We are glad to have her here today to bring a different twist on, what it means to do AOD prevention, and also just get a bigger picture on what it looks like to be a healthy campus. So just a little bit of housekeeping for you guys. With GoToWebinar, with the chat feature, that's disabled on your end. So if you want to ask questions, make comments, that will all be through the questions drop down on your menu. You should also be able to ask questions if I unmute, or you can unmute yourself at the end. And if there's anything that I need to know, you can always let us know and we'll moderate as needed. All right. So without further ado, I'd like you guys to be introduced to Ms. Jules Grable, who works at Butler University, and I'll let her do a brief introduction.
Hi, everybody. I am so honored that you are taking the time to spend this afternoon with me. My name is Jules Grable. I use she, her pronouns, and I am currently serving as the Sexual Assault Response and Prevention Specialist at Butler University. I have been in higher education since 2011 in a variety of capacities and have served as a victims advocate in that same amount of time. So I've got about a decade's worth of working in higher ed under my belt there. I actually got my start at Indiana State University as the Student Health Promotion Graduate Assistant, doing AOD work, stress management, mental health issues, bystander intervention, all of the different things. The office covered a broad variety of healthcare and just general student health topics. So I am very familiar with bystander intervention and a little bit on alcohol and other drug prevention and substance misuse prevention. But my passion, as you may see from my title, is preventing sexual violence and working with survivors of sexual violence, relationship violence, and stalking. And so that's my primary role here at Butler, is to serve as a victims advocate for those students, faculty, and staff who are affected by those different forms of violence. And then the other half of my job is working to prevent those different forms of violence so that I can essentially work myself out of a job, which would be the ultimate goal. Today, we're going to be talking about how we as student affairs professionals, health educators in the higher education system, sorry, words are hard. How can we collaborate to make our bystander intervention and AOD prevention efforts more effective for our students? So before we dive into that, this is just a little bit of background on me professionally, a little bit more on a personal level, because I think it's important that we recognize that we are more than just the work that we do. I am a mom. I have two beautiful kiddos, Henry, who is 10, and Eleanor, who is about to be 3 in about 2 weeks, and a wonderful partner, Carrie, who has been with me for the last 5 or 6 years. Depending on how you count, whether it's from dating or from when we got married. In my free time, my favorite self-care activity is reading. I'm on book number 28 or 29 for the year. I am an avid reader. I basically just devour it. And I would definitely invite all of you to practice self-care in your own lives. I know that the work we do can be really heavy. And so I want to make sure that everyone is practicing some sort of self-care in their own regular life. Before we dive into the content, I want to give a brief warning about what we might be talking about today. We're going to talk about alcohol misuse primarily, although when we talk about alcohol, we can also consider other drugs or other forms of incapacitation among college students when we consider this. And we're also going to be talking about perpetration of sexual violence and the role of the bystander in preventing violence. So as we move through today's discussion, I would invite you to take care of yourself in whatever way works best for you. So if you need to mute me for a little bit so that you can collect yourself, or if you need to leave a little early because the content becomes a little activating for you, that is 100% fine. Please feel free to reach out to either myself or to Annabelle if you need any assistance, or if you have any questions or concerns about the content, or if you need someone to just kind of talk to and work through whatever it is that you're feeling. So let's talk about alcohol use in college. When we think about pop culture and college, we think Animal House. We think House Bunny, we think big raging parties, probably at a fraternity house, probably with a lot of open drinking, underage drinking, all these different kinds of things. This is what we see in our media, right? We don't see a whole lot of studying necessarily, which is actually what the students are there for. And we also don't see a lot of healthy behaviors, where we do have a lot of students who don't engage in drinking behaviors or don't engage in other drugs. We have many students who are practicing healthy life skills, but we don't get to see that in our media, which creates a really interesting foundation for our students as they come into college, where they expect a certain amount of drinking to occur, when it might not necessarily be the case. So we have to consider, are students drinking because they want to, or are they drinking because they think it is an expectation, because they think it is something that they are supposed to do? As it is, approximately 50% of college students drink alcohol within the past month. 27% of those engage in binge drinking or over drinking. So probably engaging in high intensity drinking, like drinking games, drinking very, very quickly, drinking shots in rapid succession, all of these different kinds of things. And there are pretty serious consequences to when students engage in this kind of drinking behavior. Approximately 1,500 students die every year. 696,000 students are hurt. 1 in 4 students experiences academic difficulties due to drinking, and that could be a variety of different things. It could be them missing classes. It could be them being unable to focus. They might be getting behind on their schoolwork. They might be placing going out and partying more highly on their priority list than their schoolwork, all of these different kinds of things. Those who are binge drinking typically do even worse than those who are drinking maybe just once or twice a month, right? And 13% of our students actually meet the criteria of an alcohol use disorder, which is setting them up for some pretty serious concerns as they move through their collegiate career and as they enter the world. As I said before, alcohol is not necessarily the main focus of what I do. And so how alcohol interacts with sexual violence is much more what I am familiar with, and much more of kind of what we're going to focus on today. When you talk to a group of students and you tell them that alcohol is the #1 date rape drug, they all kind of look at you like, what? But alcohol is not a drug? We have to explain to them that, yeah, in fact, it is. It is a mind-altering substance, and it is present in at least 50% of reported sexual assaults, whether that's the victim had been drinking, the perpetrator had been drinking, or both of them had been drinking. And the important thing about that statistic is that is the reported sexual assaults. We know that sexual assault is a vastly underreported crime, which means that if we know about half of reported sexual assaults include alcohol, it's probably safe to assume that at least half of the unreported sexual assaults also include alcohol. This is even more This is even more likely because a lot of students who are sexually assaulted when they have been drinking are afraid of repercussions of their drinking. So for example, if you go to the Dean of Students office and say that I was assaulted, but I was drunk at the time and I'm underage, I'm scared that I'm going to be kicked out of school because I was drinking underage. Or if I go to the police, then I'm going to be in trouble because I was doing something illegal at the time of my assault, which prevents folks who are underage or drinking or doing other drugs at the time of the assault. It prevents them from reporting it at all. Heavy drinking is also heavily associated with perpetration of sexual violence among men. So this is typically men as perpetrators. However, men are not always the perpetrators. Women or non-binary folks can be perpetrators, just as men, women, and non-binary folks can be victims. Sexual violence doesn't really care about gender. Anyone can be affected. High-risk drinking behaviors like those drinking games, those off-campus parties, the fraternity parties, basically the things that we see in media, those locations increases the presence of high-risk drinking, which therefore increases the risk of sexual violence. Now, I am not saying that alcohol, that if somebody is drinking, that they deserve to be assaulted. Absolutely not. There is zero things that a person can do where sexual violence, relationship violence, or stalking are the logical consequences of their actions. It is never the victim's fault, regardless of how much they were drinking, regardless of what they were wearing, regardless of how much they did or did not flirt. It is never the victim's fault. When it comes to alcohol, we need to remember that perception of what you're supposed to do in college is a very big reality for our students. There is this expectation that this is what you're supposed to do. And so this perception of needing to consume alcohol really contributes to this drinking behavior. And so as alcohol and other drug prevention professionals or folks who want to make a difference, we really need to focus on changing some of these cultural norms that have made it that college is supposed to be this drinking time, that fraternity parties are supposed to be like this. We need to create new norms and a new kind of culture to replace this one that's creating unhealthy behaviors for all of our students. So before we jump into what exactly it looks like to be a bystander and how alcohol affects that, I want to talk to you really briefly about the different theories that are at play when it comes to these topics. So the first is alcohol myopia theory, which essentially says that when someone is drinking alcohol to get drunk or intoxicated, they start to see things the way they expect to see things. So even if they see something and like their sober self would think, that feels a little bit off, their drunk person might not recognize that that off thing is even happening because it's not within their realm of comprehension at that point. Alcohol compromises executive functioning. It narrows our attentional focus to what's happening right in front of us, maybe not necessarily what's happening over here, right? It makes us misread social cues. So if somebody is uncomfortable, it might be harder for us to recognize that they are feeling uncomfortable. Whereas if we were sober, we might be able to recognize much more quickly whether someone is uncomfortable or not. It reduces our capacity to process meaning. What does it mean when this person starts to pull away? What does it mean when this person looks like they're too drunk to consent? But in that moment when we are too intoxicated, we can't make that meaning happen. it impairs our working memory. We can't formulate memories the way that we normally would. Our hippocampus is like not quite functioning the way that it typically would. We are less capable of formulating and executing plans. So if we see something happening as a bystander, we might not have the capacity within our brain to think, okay, yes, this is wrong. This is what I need to do. And now I'm going to go and do it. Completing those steps is really, really difficult. And it's when we're under the influence of alcohol, we're also really heavily influenced by our environmental cues and by social norms. And so if our social norm is that, oh, well, everybody is supposed to drink, everybody is supposed to flirt, everybody is supposed to hook up, then when we're on the lookout for people feeling uncomfortable, we might not notice it as much within that context because we've been conditioned to see things a certain way. And when we're sober, we have the mental capacity to figure out, okay, actually, yeah, this person does look really uncomfortable, or wow, that person is acting a little aggressive. Whereas when we're under the influence, we start to revert back to these social norms that we've been conditioned to believe instead of digging in a little deeper and taking time to figure out what actually is happening. We're filling in the blanks, but we're not necessarily filling them in correctly, if that makes sense. Second theory that I would like to introduce you to is bystander intervention theory. Now, there are tons of different bystander intervention trainings and theories and all of these things out there. I personally have used several different ones, Green Dot, Step Up Bystander Intervention, the Responsibility Program. There's lots of different ones. Some of them are homegrown. I've written some, like there's tons of them out there, but all of them have two basic teaching points that they want to accomplish. One is to prevent specific instances of something bad from occurring by encouraging bystanders to engage in some sort of intervention strategy. Now, from my perspective, I typically teach students to look out for situations of sexual violence because that is my window. However, bystander intervention can be used in a variety of different capacities, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that is later. But the goal of any bystander program is to give bystanders the skills to intervene when they see a risky scenario. This is a reaction to something that is currently happening, right? The second piece is to help create this cultural shift that I was talking to you about how to create new healthy social norms and kind of break down those unhealthy or harmful attitudes that we've been living in for so long, whether that's, I'll give an example. I'll pick on the rom-com genre for a little bit. You know, so in the romantic comedy genre, we see a lot of stalking for love kind of tropes where someone is in love with a person and they will follow and badger that person until they fall in love with them, right? And since it's a rom-com, they fall in love at the end and everybody's happy and everything is great. However, the behaviors that get them to that point are really harmful and unhealthy. And so proactive behaviors that we can teach bystanders is how do we have a different kind of conversation about these behaviors? How do we replace these kind of stories with more healthy stories of, well, if somebody tells you no, then you don't continue to badger them until they say yes, right? How do we change these kind of things? How do we do this? And so bystander trainings help folks to have those conversations, to recognize those different things within our culture and to talk about them. Now, the bystander decision-making model breaks down bystander intervention, particularly reactive bystander intervention, into 5 basic steps. One is to notice the event. You have to recognize that something is going on. Second is you need to interpret that event as something that's pretty risky, that is uncomfortable, that's not normal, that you want to change. The third is you need to develop the sense of personal responsibility to do something about it, right? So we might notice something and recognize that it's wrong and not okay, but then decide, you know what, but that's not my place. right? So that next step, that feeling of personal responsibility, is a crucial step. The next piece is to create a plan. Okay, I'm seeing this thing. I've decided that I need to do something about it, but what do I do? Okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do A, B, C, and D, and that's how this is going to go down. Cool, great, I've made a plan. And then the next step is to actually put that plan that you have created into action, which can be a really hard step as well, right? Like, okay, I've thought this through. If I say this, then, I can probably help this person out. But actually taking the step to do that is really intimidating, especially if you are afraid of confrontation, you're really super shy, you're not sure if the situation that you're looking at is risky, like you think it is, but maybe it's not, I'm not quite sure, it's kind of in the gray area, right? Choosing to act can be really, really difficult. There are so many barriers that people experience. So when it comes to being a bystander and using bystander skills, there's a variety of different places where we can use those bystander skills. Today, we're focusing on alcohol and other drugs and sexual violence, but the Step Up program recognizes and provides training for all of these other topics when it comes to bystander intervention. So when we provide bystander intervention trainings to our students, even if we are focusing just on sexual violence prevention or just on preventing alcohol and alcohol misuse, right? Those skills are applicable to a variety of other things. They can use these skills in other areas of their life. So we're not just teaching them about this one thing, that we're teaching them skills that can be applied in a variety of different ways, which is why these different kinds of trainings are so, so critical. As far as intervening to prevent sexual assault when alcohol is involved, a recent study found that approximately 25% of sexual assaults involve an opportunity for a bystander to intervene. Now, just by the nature of what sexual violence is, a lot of violence occurs behind closed doors when there aren't necessarily bystanders present. However, this study has shown us that at least a quarter of the sexual assaults that they discovered in this study had a bystander. There were people around at the very beginning before the assault occurred that could have intervened, that could have stepped up and done something. The thing is that bystanders in these cases typically notice what they might deem as low severity assault, that there is any low, there's any like low severity kind of assault. But what bystanders might deem as low severity behaviors, things like a person being incredibly aggressive about getting another person upstairs, a person being incredibly handsy with someone who is too intoxicated to say no. These first initial red flags that something might be up, right? That's what these bystanders are looking for. And they're subtle and they are incredibly nuanced, and it's really hard to see. And so few of the victims who are experiencing this kind of behavior actually communicate their discomfort to others. The study found only 34%. And so it's really up to the bystanders to be able to identify what is and is not risky or questionable behavior by continuing to pay attention, by watching if things escalate, by watching to see if any particular person is being isolated or targeted. They might want to be on the watch for just discomfort in nonverbal communication, whether that's not making a whole lot of eye contact, whether that's closed off body language, all of these different kind of subtle and nuanced things, which can be really hard to read, right? Which creates an additional barrier for bystanders to intervene in that we're not sure exactly what it is that we're looking at as a bystander. Do I step in and say something? Do I try to pull this person away, or are they just like legitimately flirting and having a great time? And that's okay. So overcoming that barrier of, am I right? Am I wrong? Am I making a big deal out of this? What do I do? Because we don't want to look foolish. We don't want to embarrass ourselves in front of other people, in front of our peers, right? We don't want to be perceived as a cockblock or whatever, right? We want to be liked. We want to be accepted. We want to be part of the group. And so if I'm watching a situation and I'm not quite sure if it is or is not okay, it can be really hard for someone, for this bystander, to step in and to do something. And when we throw alcohol into the mix, it makes intervening even more complicated. So next, we're going to combine those 5 decision-making steps of the bystander intervention theory with how alcohol affects us. So that first step is noticing the event. If it's hard for a sober person to recognize the subtleties and the nuances of what's going on, an intoxicated bystander is going to be even more inept at judging those behaviors. And with alcohol myopia theory kind of playing in here, they might not recognize the behaviors as problematic at all, right? They're going to rely more heavily on that stereotyping and those social norms than taking that extra step and thinking about it themselves. What's going on here? Let me take this critical thinking to the next level. They're more likely to zone out and just focus on what they are doing. They kind of create this little cone around themselves, like walking around with blinders, and they just see what's happening in front of them instead of what's happening all around, which can be dangerous for themselves if they're not noticing what's happening around them. They could put themselves at risk for injury. But also they're not being able to look out for other folks when they're only concentrating on what's directly in front of them. So noticing the event significantly decreases when we engage in alcohol and intoxication. When it comes to interpreting an event as high risk, again, that alcohol myopia theory is going to make us more attentive to those positive social cues. Like, oh yeah, we're at a party, we're supposed to be drinking, we're supposed to be hooking up. Like those people in the corner, they're clearly hooking up, like good for them. Where as a sober person, they might be like, wow, those 2 people, one of them looks okay and one of them doesn't look okay. That's not that doesn't match. Maybe I should dig into this a little bit deeper, right? So interpreting the event as high risk is much more complicated, right? We aren't going to necessarily believe that something is high risk in that moment because everything feels great, everything is fine. There's a delayed understanding of what is actually happening. Now, I want to point out that sometimes we hear that, oh, well, if I'm drinking, I'll actually intervene a lot more because I'll have liquid courage. That, I mean, I can't say that anyone's individual experience is going to be that, you know, that might be the case for that one specific individual. But studies have shown that that liquid courage, when we need to intervene, actually dissipates after we have been drinking. We aren't understanding that things are dangerous, which lowers the need for the liquid courage to begin with, right? In addition, when we already have all of these barriers, that liquid courage doesn't provide us a way over them. It just creates new barriers to come up and to overcome. When it comes to developing that feeling of personal responsibility, Alcohol tends to create this diffusion of responsibility effect where, well, there's so many people here. It doesn't have to be me who intervenes. I've already had way too much to drink. There's no way that I can effectively intervene anyway. And so we're going to let the sober people do it. When it comes to the fraternity and sorority environment, I'm going to let the sober sister do it or the sober brother do it. I'm going to let our DDs handle the situation. I'm drunk. I don't have to do anything. I am now shirking my responsibility. Right? So we've created another barrier to intervening with this alcohol situation. It also lowers the intention to intervene. Oh, well, I'm going to go out tonight. I'm not going to put on my bystander hat. I'm just going to go out and have a good time. Right? Even though during like my normal everyday thing, I might be a model bystander. I might be looking out for every single person, right? But when we start to drink, it lowers our intention to intervene. Additionally, there are a lot of social pressures out there that discourage intervention, particularly among male identifying folks, that if you intervene, then you're a square, you're not cool, you're bringing the party down, you're a cockblock, you're whatever. There's a lot of negative association with intervening because you are preventing somebody from doing something. Even if preventing somebody from doing something is better for everyone involved. When that alcohol takes effect, those negative appraisals, those negative perceptions and social pressures increase, creating another barrier to intervening. Fourth step is deciding how to help. So when we are intoxicated, our prefrontal cortex isn't really working the way that it normally would. We're not making memories the way that we would. Our problem-solving capabilities are significantly decreased, creating plans for what's going to happen next. Really decreases our psychomotor speed, or just our ability to move around significantly decreases. Our response to situations really decreases. We don't have the mental capacity to figure out a way to help, let alone a way to help effectively, right? And so deciding to help when we're under the influence is significantly hindered by the alcohol or other drugs that are within our body. The last step is to choose to act and to overcome all of those barriers and actually do the thing, right? In the moment, an intoxicated person is much more focused on what is happening right now and what is supposed to be happening right now, instead of what potential consequences in the future might be. So choosing to act becomes much more complicated because that's not what we're supposed to be doing right now. It doesn't fit in this narrative that we have created for this moment in time. Alcohol even encourages a certain amount of aggressive behavior. Oh, you should drink more, or you know what, we're going to go out and we're going to drink, we're going to fight, or fighting just occurs. And so there's a certain amount of expecting aggressive behavior, which blinds us to aggressive behavior that might actually be happening. So choosing to act becomes incredibly complicated when everything around us and everything within us is telling us, maybe that's not a great idea. And so when it comes to bystander intervention, we need to be talking more about the barriers that alcohol is putting in front of our bystanders. I've done a lot of different bystander trainings at a bunch of different campuses in a variety of different ways: online, virtual, asynchronous, synchronous, all of the different things. But none of them have ever directly addressed the need for a discussion about alcohol and how it impacts the bystander, how to overcome those additional barriers that are put up because of the alcohol, and the need of creating better pro-social norms when it comes to alcohol misuse to prevent all of the things that are hurting our bystander behaviors to begin with. And so the last thing that we're going to talk about is, what can we do as practitioners, as supporters of these students and educators, to create more effective programming for our alcohol misuse education, for bystander education? What can we do to help our students overcome these additional barriers that they're facing if they choose to engage in drinking behavior? I think the most important thing that we can do is to bring our efforts together. Now, I don't know about what all of your campuses look like, and maybe you all have great, big, enormous staffs where you can do a bunch of brilliant things and not have to collaborate a whole lot. That's not necessarily the case for everyone. Here at Butler, I am a one-person office, and so all of my efforts are really, really limited because I can only do so much, right? But if we collaborate with a bunch of different offices who have similar and overlapping topic areas, we can become much more effective and much more efficient in the ways that we engage our students. So for example, when it comes to alcohol education and silence or sexual violence prevention here at Butler, I frequently do different programming with our health educator office because they talk about AOD, and AOD is deeply interconnected with the prevention of sexual violence. And so collaboratively, we can be more effective than just me by myself or just our AOD person by themselves. It's also critical to make sure that we are having conversations with our diversity, equity, and inclusion folks, because alcohol and sexual violence affects people differently. It affects different genders differently. It affects folks who have different mental health or physical abilities differently. And the impact of how alcohol affects all of us is so different, and how we view other folks who engage in alcohol drinking behaviors is so different. It's so important to make sure that we are including everyone in this conversation and discussing how all of those different parts and pieces overlap and interconnect. The next piece is to host in-person trainings, which I recognize as a person who is currently doing a virtual training is a little bit ironic, but research has shown us that in-person trainings are more effective than those virtual and online options. Now, that said, I think any kind of training is better than no training. So like if you on your campus are unable to do in-person trainings and you can only do virtual or online trainings, friends, do the online trainings. It's more important to have the information out there in whatever capacity than it is to not have it at all. When we are doing our in-person trainings, we want to make sure that they are as interactive as humanly possible. The students sit through classes day after day after day, getting lectured to, and they're sick of it. They're tired. They don't want to hear it anymore. And so having them do different activities, having them have small group discussions or large group discussions, having them get up and move their bodies around is incredibly engaging and makes them more likely to pay attention to what you have to say, makes them more excited about what you have to say, and makes them more, I don't know, it makes them more apt to want to do what they need to do to intervene. The Green Dot program in particular is really good about doing this. There's very little lecture, and there's lots of creating ideas and coming up with ways that you can intervene in a variety of different situations. Green Dot does this incredibly, incredibly well. So when it comes to your trainings, create something that is engaging and interactive. Turn it into a game. They love games. Actually, one of the, we currently offer the Green Dot trainings, and while it is not a perfect training, one of the things that the students really, really enjoy is that they get broken up into teams, and there's a competition throughout the training to see who can get as many green chips as they can for answering right questions correctly, for participating, all these different kinds of things. And so it's important, it gamifies it for them. It makes them excited. It creates this kind of feeling of competition that makes it fun. Even though we're not necessarily talking about fun topics, we can make the environment fun for them. It's also important to write campus-specific curriculum. What are the things that your campus is currently facing when it comes to AOD and sexual violence, or AOD and just AOD, alcohol misuse? What are the things that as bystanders we need to teach our students? Tailor that content to those needs. So for example, having specific presentations for different groups on campus, having a specific bystander training for athletes with situations and scenarios that athletes are likely to experience. What does their environment look like? What is going to be the thing that they are going to see? Then have different presentations for Greek life, for fraternities, and a different one for sororities, right? What are the needs of those specific audiences? Now, all of those trainings are probably going to have very similar themes and very similar skill sets, but the scenarios, the examples, the interactions are what we need to tailor to each individual group. This next part is the piece that is missing from most, if not all, bystander intervention training programs. We currently do not talk about the specifics of alcohol. Maybe there are some homebrew bystander intervention trainings that do, but to my knowledge, alcohol is never specifically discussed in how it affects bystander behavior. And so we need to create a better understanding amongst our bystanders of what healthy substance use is, how to prevent over drinking, how to drink responsibly, how to engage in other drugs responsibly. What are these habits that we need to improve upon to create a better sense of community safety? What are those parts and pieces of our AOD education that we need everyone to hear, and we need to bring it into the bystander conversation? We need to discuss the attitudes that are associated with drinking games. They might be a big part of the alcohol culture on your campus. Okay, then we need to talk about it. What are the attitudes associated with those drinking games? Why do we do those drinking games? Why are they important? Why do they play a role? Okay, let's talk about how they can be harmful, why they are harmful. How can we create a better environment, a safer environment, right? We can still party and have fun and play games, but what's a way that we can do it in a safer capacity? Tell students how alcohol impacts bystander intervention. Take them through each of those steps. Why does it affect these different steps? How does it affect these different steps? Know that these additional barriers are going to be coming up for you. We're all going to have barriers regardless, because regardless, no matter how great a person is at intervening, or however wonderful a bystander intervention training is, we are always going to have barriers. And so alcohol creates new ones. We need to be aware of what those are going to be so that we can strategize around them. In the Green Dot training, we strategize around overcoming our barriers. Okay, you're shy, so what do we do instead to get around that particular barrier? Okay, you're afraid of physical retaliation if you intervene in this particular situation. That is a legitimate fear. How do we intervene around that particular barrier? We need to do that kind of planning around the barriers that alcohol is going to instill in our students as well. Brainstorm with them, figure out what it is that they can do in order to overcome these things that they may face, especially if they choose to continue engaging in high-risk drinking behaviors. Another thing to address is talking about rape supportive beliefs. A lot of these victim blaming ideas need to be discussed in our bystander intervention training, because these rape supportive beliefs are just as much of a barrier to intervening as alcohol itself is. So believing that if somebody drinks, they deserve to be assaulted is a rape supportive belief. Well, we need to break down that belief and instill the truth in that person that there is nothing an individual can do, regardless of how much they drink, that sexual violence is the logical consequence. It is never the victim's fault. Have that discussion with them, because it might be the first time that anyone's ever had that discussion with them. This might be a completely new concept to them, right? I'm thinking of our first year students who are coming into campus and they haven't been exposed to a whole lot, right? We don't do a whole lot of education when it comes to alcohol and other drug use. We don't do a whole lot of education when it comes to violence prevention, rape supportive beliefs, all of these different things in our elementary and secondary schooling. So this is the first time they're having these conversations. And so as educators, we need to be able to have those conversations with them and open their eyes to something that's a little bit different than maybe what they believed before. Engaging with folks who are male identifying can be incredibly beneficial as well. As studies have shown us, men have higher pressure to consume large amounts of alcohol in social settings. There is also a lot of pressure for men to hook up more than women, to engage in a certain amount of sexual activity, or they are ostracized or looked down on by their male peers. There might be additional sexual aggression because they feel pressured to engage in a certain amount of sexual activity. Men might be more likely to witness sexual aggression, but not know or not feel that they are socially able to intervene due to the effects of alcohol, or due to the fact that, well, if I intervene in this, then my brother isn't going to get laid tonight and it's going to be my fault, and he's not going to think I'm supportive, he's not going to think I'm cool, he's not going to want me to be around, I'm going to be ostracized from my group, all of these different things and pressures. So having a conversation that addresses those specific pressures and what male identifying folks are experiencing in the moment and the additional hurdles that they might have to intervening can be really, really beneficial. Along that same note, talking with folks who are non-binary or trans, what are the additional barriers that they're facing? What kind of pressures are they experiencing that might prevent them from intervening in a certain situation? How do we help them feel safe and capable of intervening in a variety of different situations, right? We need to make sure that we are tailoring our trainings to the needs of these different populations. When it comes to a little bit of a bigger picture, we need to work towards creating new norms when it comes to alcohol and sexual violence prevention. So the most effective way that we have found to do this is through social media, because that is where the students are. Instagram, TikTok, Twitter a little bit, but becoming less so. Facebook is essentially irrelevant at this point. Keeping up with those social media trends and being on their Instagram feeds with these message about healthy substance use prevention strategies. What can you do to help another person? What are some different ways that you can intervene? Here is a rape myth and let's bust it. All of these different kinds of healthy messages, and replace the old unhealthy messages with healthy ones. It's slow work, it's hard work. It might feel like you're not getting anywhere very fast, but having these conversations and starting those conversations is really, really important. And the more they see it, the more they are likely to talk about it and the more they are likely to believe it. We also want to encourage peer facilitated conversations about alcohol use and sexual violence prevention strategies. We as educators have a lot to say, and it's wonderful and it's needed, and we absolutely need to be out there and sharing our message. But we need the peers to be doing it even more. They need to be having those conversations, maybe not even necessarily in any sort of formal capacity like a presentation or a workshop or what have you, but in informal capacities when they are sitting in their residence hall like lounge and just talking, having conversations there, bringing it up, making it normal to talk about bystander intervention strategies, making it normal to talk about ways to engage in healthier drinking behavior, right? Starting these conversations and making sure that it is part of our culture, and encouraging those students who do start those conversations and who do have them. The last strategy I would recommend is to take a look at the different policies that are currently present in your campus. So if there are any policies that are currently in place that might prevent someone from intervening because they don't want to get in trouble for their own potentially bad behavior, I would invite you to reconsider what that might look like if you took that piece out and allowed them to engage in bystander behavior instead of being afraid of whatever consequences might be. So this might be, like if somebody is assaulted and they were drunk at the time, okay, well, there's an amnesty policy for that person. It's more important that we address the sexual misconduct than it is for us to address the alcohol piece. Maybe we need to have conversations about bans or limits on alcohol. Maybe we need to restrict the different alcohol outlet density that are around campus. What does it look like? How can we create, with our policies and laws, big picture, an environment where we can encourage bystander behavior? What can we do to create bystander behavior as a norm in our community? That it's a norm for people to step up, to say something, to do something in whatever capacity that looks good for them and feels comfortable and safe for them. So higher view, what can we do to make that more comfortable for folks? Overall, we need to bring these two puzzle pieces together. They are so deeply interconnected, and we need to have deeper conversations about how alcohol is affecting our bystander behavior amongst our students, and to help give our students additional tools to overcome the barriers that alcohol may present in their efforts to prevent sexual violence. Does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns? I know that you can send questions to to us directly, I think. While you are typing those in, if you would like, these are my resources, so you know that I didn't make it up. Yeah, that is all I have. I'm going to pull up.
Got a question from Jessica. She said, this was great info. Not sure if I missed it. Will we have access to the PowerPoint?
I'm happy to share it with you if you want it, yeah.
All right, Jenny looks like she had a question.
Oh, hello?
All right, you should be able to, yep.
Yep, sorry about that. Actually, I had the same question, is how to get access of the presentation. Thank you so much. I'm from Northeastern Illinois University, and we have started bystander intervention that includes alcohol impacts. So it's amazing. We're part of the DOJ grant for sexual assault prevention and awareness, dating and domestic violence and stalking. So this is very exciting. This is a great program. I'm chairing our group to develop something like this, and I would love to be able to just help, use you as kind of like a resource for developing our program as well. So thank you so much for this.
Absolutely. I would love to be a part of that. Shoot me an email and we can absolutely collab, because that sounds absolutely brilliant.
So Jules, is your email part of the invite?
I don't know. Can I put a thing in the chat, Annabelle?
Yep.
I can't even see the chat. That's why I raised my hand.
Oh. Well, my email is JEArthur, ARTHUR @butler.edu.
So is it JE as in Elizabeth? JE.
It is. And
Okay.
you guessed the E right. It is in fact Elizabeth.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Looking forward to hearing from you.
If there's not any other questions, I did want to say, once again, Jules, thank you for coming today. It was great info to share with us and to kind of ponder about. For those that you did attended today, you will get an email about an hour or so after the presentation is done. It'll send you a link for the survey to give us some feedback. And then if you would like credit for like CEUs, MCHES, things like that, you would just need to put in your ID numbers there. So if we don't have any other questions, double check. Rose, did you have anything?
Yeah, I had put a question in I typed it up, but I don't know if it's visible, so I'll just, say it out loud. So the program that we use includes the idea of bringing in people who are more sober or more able to help, because we acknowledge that, if someone has been drinking, they are not necessarily the best person to intervene.
Right.
And sort of the parallel that I use is, if you see someone who needs CPR and you don't know how to do CPR, don't try to do it. Just you can feel really good about yourself if you're able to get someone else to be able to do it. So even being like a step in the process is something that is really, really important.
Absolutely. Under the Green Dot program and several others, because honestly, they all kind of use the same vocabulary. There's usually 3 Ds: direct, distract, and delegate. And delegate is probably the plan that would be most effective if somebody is too intoxicated to intervene effectively. And that is 100% a delegation that you just described. Any other thoughts, questions? Thank you all so much for spending your afternoon with me. I really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, feel free to email, or any fun projects you're working on. I love to collab. It's one of my favorite things. So feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much, Jules.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.